Tomorrow. Okay. Doctrines of contract. Now, to understand employment, we're going to focus on employment relationships, but we need to sort of look at some of the essence behind these doctrines of contract. What they are is they're your right to contract, and it's your most powerful tool. Life is a contract. Whether you know it or not, you've probably ventured into a half a dozen or a dozen today, whether it's a quick little agreement. So to understand this right from the legal perspective is still important. So a contract is a legally recognized agreement between two or more persons, giving rise to obligations that may be enforced in the courts. By such an agreement, parties not only restrict their present or future freedom to act by limitations imposed upon themselves. You see, we're doing it all to ourselves by the agreement. They are creating a set of legal rules binding as regards to themselves and only themselves. So that's that power you have, is you can literally take control and deal under these private contracts. But if you're unaware of that, you'll fall into the default benefit system that they created. Okay? So it's expressed in this doctrine, the freedom of contract. It's the ability of the parties to agree the most advantageous bargain between them without interference from the courts. The courts aren't there to infringe on us. They're there to resolve disputes that we can't resolve amicably. In the 18th century, there was little restriction placed upon this freedom, the philosophy being that men could pursue the interests in the way they saw fit, and that the duty of law was merely to give effect to the intentions of the parties, and this position still finds expression today. We have a powerful right to structure our life and our work relationships however we want. And that sort of segues into this privity of contract, this idea of a private relationship. Okay, it's a doctrine whereby one can enforce contractual rights against another only if one was a party to the contract. Under the general doctrine of privity of contract, no one who is not an original party to a contract is entitled to seek to enforce the terms of the contract or is bound by any of its provisions. So what that is under a private contract, it is a very closed relationship. But when you look at it is, how many people here, what are they called, garnishees? Had a garnishee at work, and then all of a sudden the government comes in and says, we want you to give us 30% or 40% of his pay. Well, if you were just under contract with the employer, where'd they get the authority to come in? So when we look at that relationship, for what this relationship really is, there's the government, you're under contract with the government, and with an employer. And so when you fail in fiduciary sending the money to the government goes to him and says, give me a garnishee, and redirects the money there. See, they're actually a party to this contract. But when you work in your own capacity for your own benefit, they can't come in and say, give us his money. They can if they go to court and get due process of law and prove that you owe them money, but they just can't walk in with a garnishee. And we actually have a letter, like when people are restructured and stuff for garnishees, you know, if their taxpayer still owed a bit of money and they're trying to garnishee, we got the business owner will send him a letter and say, we'll give you all the money as soon as you can send me a letter saving me harmless from breaching this private agreement between us. The letter never comes back. Okay? They understand this stuff very well. Okay? But when we don't, we're connected somehow through a benefit program to them, that's where they get their authority. So that's what we look at. That's what the common option is. What most people are working under is what is now, we call it the common option. We don't even think there's another way out. Because it's the way, you know, you look back, if we didn't have a social insurance number until 1964, how did we work before that? Did we all stand around waiting until we got one so we can go to work? You see, we live in this moment of time, but we don't see it in the bigger picture. Okay? So when we look at that, there was times in our history that there was no connection to this. Okay, so it's now got to the point we don't think we can work without a social insurance number. That's why we call it the common option. Now, if you want, you can voluntarily represent the taxpayer. You can go to work for the taxpayer for the benefits of CPP, because that's all really income tax is connected via. But if you do that, you're going to have to file an income tax return for the taxpayer you represent, because that's part of the whole quid pro quo you're doing. I would highly suggest you learn the limited rights of the taxpayer. A lot of frustration comes from people representing taxpayers and taking their human rights into the taxpayer world. He does not have the rights you have. That's that frustration that we feel. Again, I'd highly recommend you learn the Income Tax Act of Canada. It's a bit of a dry read, but once you get into it. Okay? But look at it like this. Okay? It's a game. You're playing a game. Let's look at it like Monopoly. If you don't read the rules of Monopoly, who's going to win? The banker always wins. Who's winning this game? The banker, ultimately. So again, learn the rules of the game. Obey every law applicable to the taxpayer. Because in reality, you're receiving a benefit, so then what is right is you should fulfill the other side of it. But just remember this, though. The taxpayer is an artificial person. It can't be hurt. It has no feelings. It doesn't even need anything to live. Its creator owns it, and the creator can change the rules at any time. The creator leaves it only with enough to survive. And this is why we're seeing, most people are like, what, 3 months, 6 months away from bankruptcy if you actually lost your job and couldn't get another one? That's the design of this game, okay? And its creator is more concerned of its own survival. And its true creator is the bankers, not the government. So you can take that as an option. You can look at this forgotten option. It's a private agreement. It's nothing new. We have actually met people still alive today who can remember that they used to walk in a job and the guy says, here, you got this option or this option. This is nothing new. He says, you take this option, there'll be deductions and stuff, but you'll get a benefit. You'll get a CPP thing. You take this option, you don't get deductions, but you got to keep everything you got. Okay, so they promoted the benefit rather than the flip side of the income tax on it. If you want, you can exercise it. Earn a living to sustain your life. Exercise your liberty and present yourself as a natural person. Exchange your physical and intellectual property for compensation. You're giving something up. It's some form of energy. You choose the benefits you are willing to pay the price for. We're talking about one out of many that are out there, and they're all separate connector points. Okay, so you need to study them all to see which ones you want. Don't remain disadvantaged and let others choose for you. The reason I put this in quotes is because that's the word they use in relation to people who fall into these default benefit programs. You go to section 15.2, 15.1 and 15.2 of the Charter. 15.1 is very clear. All individuals are equal before and under the law. 15.2 says 15.1 does not preclude, which means forget about 15.1, when you're talking about benefit programs. Programs that are for the amelioration of the individual. Okay? So basically, they say if you're into these benefit programs, you fall into them because you don't know what your human rights are. They view that as being disadvantaged. Because I really think that is one of the biggest disadvantages if we don't know who we are. But when you learn who you are, you maybe want to become personally responsible and learn to exercise your rights. They are your rights. And if you don't exercise them, believe me, they will. They love doing that. And when you get to that point, you'll understand that you do not cause harm or imminent threat of harm to anyone or anything. Freedom comes with that balance. And never again let the deception of man destroy your gift of freedom. Learn to live with the respect for moral and spiritual values and the rule of law, all in balance with the Canadian Bill of Rights, so you can become healthy, wealthy, and wise. That's how we were created. If it wasn't for the... Notice, take a look at their game. If we're created to be healthy, wealthy, and wise, what have they been trying to do to us? Make us sick, poor, and ignorant. They know exactly what they're doing. It really boils down to that. So here's what these costs of benefits are. I mean, again, a benefit's a benefit, but you need to weigh it into balance. Okay, here's just a quick, we'll look at just some of the highlights of this. Here's a typical employer-employer relationship at $12.50 an hour. Technically, it's $500 a week, $24,000 a year. But when you take all these benefit programs out, that basically is 22.8%, which drops that 500 to about 386, and that 1250 down to 965. 24,000 drops down to about 18.5. Now look at what that costs that employer though. That 1250 is 500 a week, but now look at all the other, he has to pay the other side of the benefits plus some other stuff. Okay, it's costing him, jumps it up to about $600 a month, or paying out $15 an hour. That's why they keep employees and employers fighting amongst each other. What if these guys ever sat down at a table and started looking at the numbers? Okay, so that 24,000 jumps up to almost 29,000. When you take what this person loses and what that person has to pay above, forgetting any late penalty filings or anything like that, you have a combined loss of about 42.7%. Do you think if both these people sat down, got themselves educated, they could work out a better deal and still get even some benefits within that? This illusion that they created on this one person takes $5-something an hour, about $10,000 a year. And that's one employee. And that's just a constant drain. Okay, and this is at a $12.50. Let's go to a higher, not the highest tax bracket, but just a little bit higher. Second highest, I believe it is, at $33.50 an hour. Well, that's $64,320 a year. Now that's pretty good. When you start walking, $60,000 a year. Look what that boils down to when you take off all these benefit programs and stuff. That $33.50 drops to $24 an hour, or $46.5 a year. And this is very high. I kept them really conservative because, I believe that's high 30s, even low 40s on that. But look at what the employer costs. That $64,000 by the time the smoke and mirrors you know, assuming there's no penalties or interest charged on any of that stuff, jumps up to about $74,000. So you got about $45,000 up to $74,000. Almost $30,000 a year for one employee. Do you really think